begin with a verse in Romans chapter 3. I'm going to read it in the New King James. I'm going to read it in the Message, and then I'll reference it in the Mirror translation as well. Romans chapter 3, verse 17. And here's why we sometimes look at different translations, because they may accentuate or bring out some truth clearer. Here's what it says in the New King James. And the way of peace they have not known. Okay? In the Message it says, they don't know the first thing about living with others. Here's what the Mirror says. They have lost the art of friendship. Wow. Wow. Lost the art of friendship. You see, if you know me a little bit, you know that I believe that faith is all about relationship. That Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay the price for our sin, but that wasn't all. Right. You may live in an estranged relationship with someone else, and maybe on their deathbed they say, I'm sorry, I forgive you, or forgive me, or something like that, but on their deathbed. Jesus did not just die on the cross to forgive you, but he rose again to restore relationship between God and us. That's a key part. It wasn't just forgiven, but that relationship is key. And I've said many times, and I hope this makes sense, if you're hoping to finally catch the right Sunday school lesson that'll finally click and it'll all make sense to you, you can get a lot of good lessons, and you can go to seminars and symposiums. But if you get to know Jesus Christ personally and intimately, you'll know what he has for you. You'll know what he wants to come about in your life. Know him, and you'll know what to do. Otherwise, you can get it backwards and just learn a bunch of stuff. Well, today, as we wrap up this series, this last lesson is how we see others, or I might say, how we relate to other people. And that's what I want to take a look at today. The vision of this place called The Well is to cultivate a community of passionate followers in Jesus Christ whose lives are being transformed in such a way that they experience health and wholeness in every area of their life, and that they extend that grace to others and thereby impact their community for Jesus Christ. Part of our vision. I think that if we grasp all the goodness of God's amazing grace and keep it to ourselves, then we're not much different than the Dead Sea. All input and nothing ever goes out to someone else. I don't think I'd want to walk up to the Dead Sea and drink from it. So we receive and experience the amazing grace of God, but then we extend it to other people. Sometimes intelligent and spiritual people lack the relational skills to enjoy good relationships with other people, and frequently then they end up blowing up relationships. They may not even know why it happens in their life, but something just always, the wheels fall off of relationships. Or they might come across disingenuous and thereby are unable to cultivate meaningful relationships. They've got a line of friends as long as a football field and a half-inch deep. None of them are really meaningful relationships because they don't come across sincere. You ever know somebody that would frequently say, hey, we need to get together? It's been 10 years and you haven't got together. You know? Be sincere. Be genuine in what you say. Let me read something from Philippians chapter 1. It says in verse 9, Paul speaking, so this is my prayer, that your love will flourish and that you will not only love much, but well. Learn to love appropriately. You need to use your head and test your feelings. Test your feelings so that your love is sincere and intelligent, not sentimental gush. Live a lover's life, circumspect and exemplary, a life that Jesus will be proud of. Bountiful in fruits from the soul, listen to this, making Jesus attractive to all, getting everyone involved in the glory and the praise of God. Friends, forget about learning Christianese. the right things that you think someone wants you to say, or the Christian buzzwords. Just be sincere. Be genuine. Present a Jesus that's just so alive in you that other people want to get to know him. Don't worry about having the right church language. Are you familiar with the term transference? Anybody that has been in a position to counsel people understands transference. They're aware of it, but it goes much deeper and broader than that. Here's what it means. And there's people that may not know the term, but they operate in it fluently. Don't even know what's going on. The unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to another. Transference. The unconscious redirection of feelings from one person to another person. It can show up in several different ways. The inappropriate repetition in the present of something that was important in one's past, maybe in childhood. You just redirect that. Redirection of feelings. Maybe something unconsciously retained, again, from an earlier day in your life, and it's redirected to someone else. A reproduction of emotions, many times from some experience that you'd rather put away and not even think about. Or the substitution of one person for another person. Something goes wrong, and you respond to it as you would of someone else. A little toddler knocks over his glass of milk, and mommy goes postal. Clearly, the reaction is disproportionate to the offense. The child might have been careless, but maybe it just happened. It's just part of being a little child growing up. But something was going on in mom, and that was just what lit the fuse, and she blew up. My first church secretary was an 80-year-old woman whom I had known for many years. And my office in that church was entered through the secretary's office to my office. I'd gone in there thousands of times. It was a heavy wood door for sound control, and there was a strip on the bottom that would rub across the carpet. That would kind of help the sound transfer from coming in and out, so I wouldn't be distracted and vice versa. And coming in there thousands of times, I knew the appropriate amount of thrust to cause that door to close over and click, click. I walked in there many times, swing the door, and it would just shut gently. Well, so one day I go walking in, and what I didn't know was that someone at the other end of this big building had the doors open, loading some stuff, and it changed the air pressure in the building. So I walked in, and I shut the door with the normal amount of thrust, but it slammed. I was a little startled, and then 10 seconds later, the door slammed open again, and I was very startled, and in comes Barbara, and she is going postal. You just said if I did something wrong, and I said, Barbara, what's happening? And it was an awkward, quiet, maybe 3 or 5 seconds, then she just broke down crying. She was of German descent, and now she's 80 years old. Her dad's long gone. Her dad always wanted a son, so she was a major disappointment to him. And in the old country, apparently he would frequently tell her, and I never knew this because she kept it pretty well buried, but he would frequently tell her, I should have taken a knife to you when you were born, the day you were born. Every time she did something that didn't live up to his expectations, he would say that to her, and she grew up with that. So slamming the door to her seemed like I was disappointed in her, and she blew up. That's kind of an example of what I'm talking about, where transference, something happens that just triggers a response that just doesn't make any sense. One day, Jesus asked his disciples, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they responded, some say you're Elijah or Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And I thought about that this week, and I thought, really? I mean, Jesus is young, smiling, long hair. You've seen him in the movies. And Elijah is an old, bald man that's really got kind of an angry attitude. How? They don't look anything alike. But apparently there was something in the conduct that reminded people of Elijah. Maybe it was the authority that Jesus walked in. Anyway, a transference there. Maybe you have heard of the term a man-eater, or like Alfalfa, president of the He-Man Woman Haters Club. Oh, Darla. Something can go on in people's lives, maybe a traumatic event, and it just bleeds over into today, and it causes self-destructive habits. And those habits may last for a season. But if they're not dealt with, processed, that they can last a lifetime, and the person, again, may not even understand what's going on. It could be resentment towards a specific gender, a special, certain socioeconomic class. You might see somebody and they drive a certain car and you just dislike them for some particular reason. You don't even know why. It can be authority. Somebody has a negative or disappointing or hurtful experience with somebody in authority, and they bristle against authority in every fashion all the way down the road. It could be an ex. You see the romantic eHarmony commercials. And then you see divorce court. And a host of feelings in between that didn't go the way someone wanted or expected. And how do they process it? People can even become angry at God. Because Jesus always called him Father, and maybe Father just sets them off because that's not a pleasant term to them. So relationships are crippled because people treat the new with someone else from a previous time in their mind. And it happens on both sides of the equations. You can walk into a new setting, whether it's a church or a job place, and you see somebody that reminds you of somebody else. And that can be good or not good. I remember when I was in grade school, my parents sent my siblings and me to Ireland to visit all our cousins and aunt and uncles. And I remember meeting one of my uncles. I walked into this castle. The castles are like restaurants over there. I walked into this castle, and my uncle was on the other side of the room. I hadn't walked up to him yet. I hadn't been introduced to him. I had never heard his voice. I saw him, and I instantly loved him because I could see my dad in him. I could see his mannerisms. I instantly loved him. So it can be a good thing, but sometimes it's not a good thing. Sometimes it's something very negative that sets us off, and a negative memory will just cause us to take a previous wound and overlay it on a new relationship, a new person, a new situation. Here's the thing. You can have an explanation for it. It could be something unwanted. It could be something undesirable. But none of that does anything to stem the damage in your future relationships. That's not where the healing is going to come. And the problem with that is that the new person, and I'm talking about maybe this present new situation, it could be future, the new person is almost certain to live up to your negative expectations. You view them, they remind you of somebody, and you were hurt before, and you're awful quiet. Am I making sense? Or I'm just trying to share what I felt God had on my heart today, because I look at us at the Well here as a predominantly cheerful group of people, but I understand that there's still stuff that we have to process, stuff that wasn't right. So I want to learn, as we close up this series, how am I supposed to see other people? And I want to learn from what Paul experienced in his life-changing moment on that road. The Apostle Paul, and one of the groups of people that he spent time with were the Corinthians. And of all the people, and you may not even know the name Corinthian, but that was a town. There was a church that Paul started in that town, and they didn't look very churchy. In fact, as I've studied a little bit of their history, they were a wild group, the Corinthians. I mean, they would make many of you in this room blush by the way they lived. Well, one of the situations, so I read the books of Corinthians again this week, and because I figured that's a group of people that Paul had to be gracious with. And I was reminded of a guy in 1 Corinthians that was having an adulterous affair with his stepmom. They did some stuff. And part of the problem was no one in the community ever said anything to him about it because they liked him. Maybe he gave money. Maybe he drove the right horse, car. I don't know. And so nobody said a thing, and it just went on. And Paul said, that's not right. And Paul put out a plan to them. You need to deal with this individual. You need to call this matter into question. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, we're going to spend a little bit of time in 2 Corinthians. Verse 5, Paul writes...
What a great word. But seeing other people begins in here. And so if you have not received his forgiveness, it's going to make it really hard for you to look at other people as being forgiven. The word that kept coming to me this morning was, God doesn't want to punish your sin. He's forgiven it. So what's left? Well, I heard an archbishop say one time that sin doesn't need to be punished, it needs to be healed. Sin carries its own punishment, but so many of us need to be healed from sin. How do we do that? And how do we begin to see other people differently? It's all the message of the cross. And you have to continually get that before you. It's not about you looking at those relationships and thinking, I'm going to do better. It's about you looking at that cross and getting that inside of yourself, immersing yourself in it. And it will begin to transform who you are, which will then affect the relationships around you. Paul mentioned that before we knew grace, we've always been best friends, but when we came to grace, he had a long-standing rejection issue that he was hurting over, and I had shame issues that I was hurting over. And as God began to heal those areas in our life, it put the bling on an already great relationship. And so it wasn't that we set out and pursued to improve the relationship. We just got under that word and just immersed ourselves in it. So with that in mind, I just want to leave you with a thought from the Mirror Translation today that I thought was worth repeating. He tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:16, this is radical. No label that could possibly previously define someone carries any further significance. I don't know what label you're carrying around with you. Is it an addiction, a divorce, a failure of some sort that you're carrying no longer has any further significance. Even our pet doctrines of Christ are redefined, and most of us in this room know exactly what that means because we have come out of legalism and law, and all of a sudden all those pet doctrines begin to crumble as we peer into the awesome face of God through Jesus Christ. This unveiling of his love redefines human life. This unveiling of his love. So maybe your prayer this week needs to be, God, remove the veil, because I want to see you in all your glory and all your beauty, which is in the person of Jesus Christ. So just pray for a greater revelation, a greater understanding. Put those relationships on hold. And just go before the Lord and just say, I want a greater revelation of who you are. And I can guarantee you those relationships will begin to improve supernaturally. You guys go and have a great week. Ladies, don't forget, there's a table out there for our women's overnight. We want you there. So could you please sign up? I need to get some sort of a head count. Even if you're not quite sure, put a question mark by your name. But Other than that, enjoy this beautiful sunny day. God bless your week, and we'll see you next week.